You may have noticed in the news recently, on LinkedIn, anywhere where people are sharing job news or workplace news, that the best companies to work for lists are starting to come out. It typically happens around Q2, Q3, when companies have been able to go through the nomination cycle at the beginning of the year, at the end of last year too. So when these lists come out naming the best companies, I always like to think of whether there is a premium that companies have when they're able to attract the best workers. And so here's a really interesting chart that shows that there might be a little bit of a premium, a little bit of alpha, so to speak, that companies can tap into when they become one of the great places to work, or when they're able to attract that kind of talent. And we'll use this conversation just to talk about whether that relationship is actually causal, or if there's something else going on. And to set up the chart, which is really interesting, the blue line that you see is the returns since 2012 for Fortune's best companies to work for. And then the black line is the S&P 500 index. In 2012, London Business School, or London School of Economics, finance professor Alex Edmonds did a study that looked at the returns of the 100 best companies that Fortune put out that year. And it showed through his data, going back to 1984, that those companies outperformed their peers by about 3.5%. And so what Bloomberg has done here with this chart is they've looked at since 2012 till today, whether that relationship still holds. And apparently it does. I mean, that chart is pretty compelling there. So the 10 companies that there are only 10 companies that are still on the list today that were on the list then, but the companies that are on the list right now return something like 480% during this period, whereas the S&P 500 has returned about 390%. So there looks like there's still a little bit of alpha there, or a bit of outperformance, which raises the question, is the reason why these companies outperform because they're the best places to work, or is it because they're able to attract the best talent, or is there something else going on? They are, quote unquote, better companies, and therefore they're better places to work as a function of being better companies, having better managers, and this performance is just kind of financial versus actually driven by the culture at the workplace or the employer brand. An interesting thing to think about too is when you look through the comments that are attached to this chart on social media, a lot of people are pointing to, and the article actually, the opinion piece that is attached to this chart right now, it talks a little bit about Howard Schultz and the Starbucks strategy going on at the minute, where Howard Schultz is back as CEO of Starbucks, and he's said to everyone that they're going to stop the share buybacks and instead reinvest in the stores and reinvest in the people. And so a lot of people, of course, when you think about workforces, point to that and say, that's the way to do it. That's how a company should go. Forget being profit driven or shareholder driven, and return to some level of stakeholder motivation. And then when you look at this chart, I think it's you can't really make that determination. I think it's interesting to see the alpha or the gap between the best companies to work for in the general sense of the S&P 500. But I go back to that first premise, which was, talent typically is the make or break when it comes to performance in a company. I mean, companies are nothing more than collections of people going towards one shared goal. And so if you're able to attract the best talent, does that mean that you're then going to outperform regardless? So do these companies that are named the best companies to work for, they're typically the biggest names in any industry. I mean, I think, the Googles, the Facebooks, all these big brands typically end up becoming the best places to work as a function of being able to, one, afford the PR that's required to get on these kinds of lists, but also to be able to invest in the things that the staff cares about. And another interesting question to ask when you see this chart is there a difference between public company performance and private company performance when it comes to whether there's an alpha between the best companies and then the worst companies to work for? I mean, if talent is the difference maker, then maybe there is something to be said for individuals who want to invest in employer brand, because regardless of whether the alpha is based on whether the company is a great place to work for, or it's able to attract the best kind of talent, or it has a history of performing financially, the idea that having a brand out there that is attractive to workers in abundance means that you're a little bit more resilient. And then if also you're able to attract the best workers, then I think you give yourself the best chance, at least, of overperforming over your competitors. And so, as somebody who works in employer brand and as somebody who thinks about this stuff all the time, I've always thought about whether there is a premium that can be placed on being a better company to work for and on being a better employer brand. I think this chart is pretty compelling to say that there probably is. But whether it is or not causal, so whether it is related to the fact that these are the best companies to work for, or because they're able to attract the best talent, I think giving yourself the best chance by investing in your employer brand and doing the things that mean that the best talent wants to come work for you, I think is probably a good idea when you want to perform over the market.